Good afternoon. I'm Jim Cunningham and I'm a member of the Trust, the St Andrew's Trust for the Study of Religion and Society, and I want to welcome you to this, the beginning of a series of lectures this afternoon. In the current times, we have Brexit and trumpet and an election looming. It raises questions for us about what it means to be human and how we as human beings flourish. Today is an introductory lecture in that series, which is outlined in the leaflet that you've been given as you came in. The lecturer today is the Rev Dr Susan Jones, who has had a career in teaching, including deputy principal of a high school, who has done some lecturing in tertiary institutions, has been in a number of parishes throughout New Zealand, and at the moment we are favoured to have her as minister of this parish. She will be speaking about human flourishing and talking about things that reflect on her work in the LGBT community, support, pastoral care, teaching and creative writing of poetry and liturgy. Susan spoke recently on religious freedoms at the Love Trumps Hate rally and a panel on the implications of the Trump administration for global politics. We look forward to what she has to say to us today and to the opportunity for question time at the end of her presentation. So would you please welcome Dr. Susan Jones.
Thank you, Jim. Well, welcome, and I hope that the building next door with the builders flourishing and making a building flourish won't be too much of a problem for us in here. This lecture is the first of two leading up to a Friday night, Saturday seminar on human flourishing. With these things, once you start preparing them, they always kind of shift and twist on you, and I've found that partly what I'm talking about here from my experience in the church is how well or not the church has addressed the issue of human flourishing. And I can see some people here that will be interested in that slant on the topic. Just before Christmas, a member of the St Andrew's community in his mid-50s received a diagnosis of an unusual aggressive cancer. Since my day job is as a minister, I went round, as you do, to talk. I found a very quiet man, gentle, shocked, saddened, but still not wanting to spoil people's day by telling them of his illness. And when we tentatively broached the subject of a funeral, similarly, he thought asking someone to take your funeral was expecting a lot of them and might burden them unnecessarily. The impression he gave was of a retiring person, almost unwilling to make an impression on the world, not wanting to cause ripples of pain. One regret which came through was that perhaps he wished he had, in terms of today's lecture, flourished more. I knew Derek was a meteorologist of 30 years standing and an outstanding flute player, but these were spoken of with quiet, modest pleasure, not in any way in a boastful manner. He had recently joined St Andrews, and over the next few months I discovered people couldn't always put a name to the face, or vice versa. Self-effacing was another word that came to my mind. Last week, Derek's funeral was held in this very church. The church was full. Besides official family tributes, no less than 18 people got up to speak about the profound effect that Derek had had on their lives. Friends, fellow musicians, colleagues from the Met Office, a nephew and uncle, school friends, fellow church members from both Methodist and Presbyterian backgrounds. Apparently, Derek had frequently managed to encourage the groups with whom he played to reach higher standards without ever criticising anyone, always being seen as encouraging and helpful. He had raised recreation to a high art form, including trips to the beach, strenuous walks, pilgrimages and holidays. He was a loved family member as son, brother and uncle. He played the flute and piccolo in a wide variety of settings, from protest marches to Scottish ceilidh to Wellington Chamber Orchestra to church gatherings and informal impromptu jam sessions. There was no doubt this quiet, gentle man had flourished as a human being. In the meantime, he had allowed and encouraged his friends and fellow musicians to also flourish. In contrast to those who jostle and manoeuvre and elbow others aside to gain the limelight and flourish famously, this was true human flourishing. And if I can introduce you to human flourishing today, as well as Derek introduced us all to the art, I will have succeeded. When I was first asked to address this topic, I turned to Google, as you do these days. I wasn't being lazy in my research. I was genuinely curious to see what this massive search engine would throw up as trending in studies in human flourishing. I wondered, for example, what would be represented on the first page of the search. I was thinking of it as a survey to see who is the most preferred Prime Minister or the most popular political party. And this is what I found. First, as is appropriate, an article on Aristotle, human flourishing and the limited state. Then dear old Wikipedia came in with a definition of the word flourishing. And a group concerned with international relations and public policy was the next listed, just before Maori Ora, which turned out to be a research theme in the Centre of Maori Research Excellence, which is funded by the Auckland University and the Tertiary Education Commission. Cornell University provides an article on the science behind human flourishing. And then the Free Dictionary, their definition is listed. A conservative-sounding institute for faith work and economics expresses interest in a holistic approach to life, spirituality and work, and asks, what is flourishing? The Yale Centre for Faith and Culture within the Yale Divinity School describes their project, God and Human Flourishing, as, quote, dedicated to cultivating and resourcing a new theological movement grounded in the conviction that Jesus Christ is the key to human flourishing. And finally, Psychology Today sported a review of a book, Human Flourishing, Measuring Wellbeing, written by Paul Anand, which is about measuring well-being for economic purposes. It's interesting, the Centre for Maori Research Excellence embraces human flourishing, or Māori ora, as a research theme in order to promote prosperity for Māori. Though the point is made that Māori excellence requires grounding in Māori heritage and worldviews, it's clear that the end goal is to enhance prosperous Māori futures. And similarly, the review of Anand's book states, Anand challenges us to bring well-being to the heart of analyses of market efficiency. We should treat the lack of focus on well-being as a market failure itself. So for some, human flourishing is becoming an economic issue for human beings and their society and those who would lead them. So what did I find then in my Google search survey, such as it was? Psychology, philosophy, economics, theology, scientific investigations, Maori themes, international relations and public policy, all are in the quest to discover different aspects of human flourishing and its importance within and through their discipline. So what is this human flourishing that they are chasing? It has been named as well-being, welfare, or happiness. Aristotle's original word for it was eudaimonia, which one dictionary renders as a contented state of being happy and healthy and prosperous. Don't we wish? Or we could name human flourishing as living within an optimal range of human functioning. I don't know who wrote that definition. Other words associated with it are goodness, generativity, growth, and resilience. So what is not flourishing? Not flourishing can be called pathology, illness, or languishing. And in other words, it is living a life that feels hollow and empty. And so by contrast, flourishing is a life that is full and abundant. In the first article Google brought up in its search results, the author writes, according to Aristotle, there is an end of all the actions that we perform, which we desire for itself. This is what is known as eudaimonia, flourishing or happiness, desired for its own sake, with all other things being desired on its account. In other words, human flourishing is the thing we desire above all else. Anything else we desire is a means to the end of human flourishing. That is, it's because we wish to flourish that we seek to acquire that which will help us flourish. We are told flourishing is the highest good of human endeavour and that to which all actions aim. It is success as a human being. The best life is one of excellent human activity. Sounds good, so how is your life going? Is it filled with excellent human activity? There's a thought to take home. And as you live your life, rate it as to whether it's excellent human activity. And here he comes. At the moment we see a United States president striving to gain eudaimonia, or human flourishing, to become happy, reaching out through Twitter and executive orders and by keeping his promises. He seeks to flourish, and yet it seems his choices are leading to anything but flourishing for himself and for others. Maybe we could sum up Trump's dilemma and by contrast, remember how Derek's life was such an example of human flourishing if we look at this. The distinction of a good person is to take pleasure in moral action. In other words, human flourishing occurs when a person is concurrently doing what he or she ought to do and doing what he or she wants to do. Doing what he or she ought to do and doing what he or she wants to do. The two coincide in the person who is flourishing, and by so flourishing, they help others around them to flourish too. But why human flourishing now? Why this interest in recent work in these diverse fields, or this wide variety of disciplines, interested in this subject at this time? The Yale God and Human Flourishing Project suggests a reason. They see their study happening alongside a twofold background. On the one hand, a resurgence of the critiques of religion as both intellectually implausible and practically harmful, and on the other hand, a growing sense that secularism lacks resources to address some fundamental issues of human life, such as providing grounds for human rights. So the shift out of Christendom into a more secular worldview is their sense of the timing of this rise in interest in flourishing. The God and Human Flourishing Project seeks to return foundational questions about a truly flourishing life to the centre, they say, of intellectual inquiry in the church and theological academy. I share this view of the state of breakdown in interaction between secular society and religion. Because my day job is as a minister of Christian religion, I'm intrigued to discover what the church has said and not said about the importance of human flourishing. And though it's obvious many disciplines are studying this subject today, I'm wearing my trifocals, looking through the lenses of theology, religion, and spirituality. The Divinity School at Yale claims that concern for human flourishing is at the heart of Christian proclamation. Theologians, they say, have long proclaimed that the very heart of a Christian's hoped-for future, which comes from God, is the flourishing of individuals, communities, and our whole globe. For a reason that I'll explain later, I'm a little surprised at such a statement, but I don't disagree with this being the intention of the Christian message and its founding teacher. But they go on to make a claim that I'm not so sure that I agree with. Yet the centrality of this concern and hope has been undermined in a culture where accounts of human flourishing have been caught in secular tides, redirecting interest from the transcendent God to human beings and their mundane affairs, and replacing love of God and neighbour with a self-defeating concern for the self and the desire for experiential satisfaction. First of all, I'm not at all sure that human affairs are mundane. Some of them are pretty interesting. Nor do I agree with Yale's blaming of secularity for decentering the notion of human flourishing. In fact, I think it's a little rich for Yale Divinity School to lay the blame for the sidelining of the Christian ideal of flourishing on secular society, or to blame critics of religion alone. Even their claim that it has been achieved by overweening self-interest I find a little shaky. It's rather my impression that it is in fact churches who have shot themselves in the foot regarding the importance of human flourishing. This is true in the right-wing kind of community, such as the one in which I was raised as a child and teenager, but also in more left-wing churches, human flourishing has frequently been addressed only indirectly. The route taken to naming human flourishing has all too often been through the back door, through overemphasis on ridding ourselves of the effect of sin, both original and unoriginal. I agree with Yale that the concern of the Christian message is the flourishing of human beings. But it seems to me that as a whole, Christian churches and preachers have been more preoccupied about what happens when human flourishing wanes, when it strikes disaster or catastrophe. And it seems that they are more preoccupied with this human failure to flourish when those shipwreck conditions can be pinned home to individual wrongdoing. Yes, in using the term wrongdoing, I am carefully walking around the concept of sin, together with other Orthodox Christian concepts such as salvation, confession, forgiveness, heaven and hell. And I walk around them because the problem with these words is not only their predominant use as tools of judgment, blaming and control, but also the frequently inadequate and limited application of them in restoring flourishing when it languishes. I'm indebted, as some of you will be too, to Marcus Borg for opening my eyes to the variety of ways in which human beings need to be helped to regain the ability to flourish. He maintains that can happen not only through the confession and forgiveness of sin. Unfortunately, sin alone has often been the overwhelming focus of Christian teaching. It's therefore naturally been the key factor in caricatures of Christianity in popular culture. So while the church might have stopped doing that, this has become the church's popular image, and it's reified in all sorts of popular media. Like this one, and on the 8th day, man created sin. And this one, the big monster on the left is sin, behind the door marked temptation, with the notice on the door, do not enter. A rather beat up person is telling the man in the red jersey, hey, I wouldn't open that door if I were you. And this one, you still don't get it, do you? We must sin before we are forgiven. That's not a bad piece of advice, actually. So at the risk of reinforcing this rather mean-fisted, sin-obsessed approach, I want to use it now to illustrate more varied ways in which human flourishing might be approached in theology. Marcus Borg introduced 3 major ways that human flourishing is put at risk, and these are described in the Christian scriptures. Only in the last instance do we need to mention individual sin. So there could be more ways, but let's look at these 3. The first major theme of the defeat of human flourishing comes through the great myth of the Exodus, where the Hebrew slaves were liberated from slavery in Egypt. Many great movies have been made of this event. The problem is bondage, oppression, suppression, victimisation. You can think of other words for that condition. The effect on the people is fear and pain and poverty. The solution is liberation, deliverance, rescue. You'll be able to think of other words too. And as a result of being liberated, delivered, or rescued, humans can flourish because they then have the freedom to be, they have choice, and they can have a future and plan for such a future. There are other kinds of bondage happening right under our noses now that interfere with human flourishing. Addiction, human trafficking, homelessness, and there are many more. The list of bondage is staggering. There is no need to talk of sin as regards the victims of these kinds of bondage. They have usually been done to, rather than having hurt anyone else. The fault lies with their captors, who might flourish financially, but cannot truly flourish themselves while harming others. Remember Aristotle's position? Human flourishing occurs when a person is concurrently doing what he ought to do and doing what he wants to do. Second impedance to human flourishing is found also in the Hebrew scriptures in the alienation of a people from their homeland and each other. It's about separation or disconnection. And we see that in the Babylonian exile of 586 BC, not quite such an iconic event as the Exodus and a little harder to make into a movie. The problem is exile. People are estranged, alienated, and separated. That makes for alienation and emptiness and loneliness and meaninglessness. The solution is the return home. And so when we are at home, we flourish, we have connection, we have meaning, we have wholeness. The Persian Empire was one of many that terrorised and dominated Israel, and a large proportion of the Jewish people were deported to Babylon, ancient Baghdad, in 586 BCE and kept there for 70 years, a whole generation or more at the time. Boney M's By the Rivers of Babylon, released in 1978, I think some of you will remember it, is a popular remake of the ancient psalm that lamented the seemingly impossibility of worshipping God in a foreign land. A cry probably echoed by many Muslims in the US at the moment, or by Baha'i in Iran, or Christians in early communist China. The estranged or alienated one is simply not at home, not grounded or in familiar circumstances or using familiar language and customs. Groups in our society are similarly alienated, Couples separate. The LGBT community suffers the effects of homophobia, and modern-day exiles fill the world's refugee camps. Borg's third limitation to human flourishing is the well-known one of sin and its consequences. As I've said, the mistake the Christian Church has made is to focus only on this form of limit to human flourishing. It's been made to seem the sole remedy offered by Christian faith is to be forgiven, as opposed to being liberated or being brought home. And this approach flourishes in religious institutional life. Borg calls it the priestly narrative. So the problem is sin, rebellion, breaking the rules, disobeying commandments, just like I disobeyed the commandment of having a word fall off the bottom of the slide. And the effect is guilt. And from the part of the Judeo-Christian religion, we get the metaphor of uncleanliness, being unclean if one has done something wrong. So impurity, stain, defilement, and uncleanness. The solution is forgiveness and cleansing through sacrifice, often called atonement. And so when humans are forgiven, then love can flow and relationships can work. That is the solution. But so often in this context, the focus of the Church's scrutiny on sin has been on individual sin and and particularly the sin of non-elite people. Abraham Lincoln reminded us, well, you'll know those images, the snake and the apple, the 7 deadly sins sending us shooting off in all directions. But Abraham Lincoln reminded the world in his time to sin by silence when we should protest makes cowards of us all. Bondage and alienation are often caused by the corporate sin of other elite human beings who create victims who are often innocent, frequently helpless, and who cannot be wholly blamed for where they find themselves. To only suggest personal sinfulness as the answer to every situation is to confuse and re-victimise these people who instead might need liberation, or they might need being brought home again. In fact, personal sin is often committed when a human being is already unfree and exiled from all they need to flourish. For example, people may resort to violence and protests, and domestic violence happens when men and women are under pressure, and theft may occur when a parent needs to feed their children. So which do you think inhibits human flourishing the most in our time? Is it bondage of different sorts? Is it alienation and estrangement of different kinds? Or is it sin? A theology that concerns itself only with sin as the limitation to human flourishing offers the world an inadequate analysis. Human flourishing depends on us being free and connected to others in a situation where we can find meaning. Christianity, I believe, has been right to denounce what limits flourishing, but too much time has been wasted on one-dimensional analyses of blame. Rather, Christianity should spend time actively encouraging every aspect of human flourishing. In focusing on only part of the problem, sometimes we have copied the blinkered view of economists and politicians when they focus on the gross national product at the exclusion of all else. In 1968, Robert Kennedy critiqued this approach. The gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And almost 50 years later, the church may still be limiting human flourishing by a limited view of what is important, making the mistake of attributing a loss of human flourishing to individual fault rather than systemic racism, sexism or homophobia, or to economic systems that are designed to benefit the elite of our society, while elites are skilled at distraction, deflection, and sometimes downright dishonesty. In the Christian church, somehow we have given the impression that God says no to people instead of yes, that human flourishing is an act of self-denial rather than of self-affirmation. The worst effect of limiting the healing of human flourishing to only one method, dealing with sin alone, and of approaching human flourishing through this back door, is that great fear has been created. Fear of doing the wrong thing, fear of joy and delight and desire, fear of risk and adventure. I want to end with a story by David Griebner. It is called Firefall and pictures two approaches to human flourishing which you might recognise. A long time ago, there were some people who were the first of their world to discover fire. Fortunately, they seemed to know how important a discovery this was, and they treated the gift of fire with supreme respect and reverence. Furthermore, they were a generous people, and they were more than willing to give their fire away to anyone who wanted it. All they asked was that those to whom they gave it agreed to use it according to the rules. No one knew exactly where the rules had come from, isn't that always the case? But they seemed to have existed for at least as long as fire itself. The rules centred around a warning that was so frightening that no one had ever dared to try and prove it right or wrong. The warning was this: if any flame ever came into contact with the ground, it could set the earth itself on fire. For this reason, they were very careful to build every fire outside on a precisely arranged pile of stones that easily put the flames 2, 3, 4 feet off the ground. Only this arrangement could assure that nothing ever filtered down to the ground except a few cold ashes, and so they felt safe. The people had distilled these rules that governed their use of fire into 4 sacred sayings. They went like this, and they accompanied every gift of fire. Let those who use fire beware, build it on stones in the open air, lest fire touch and bring to birth flames to consume the earth. So these people made a kind of uneasy peace with this great gift. However, one day they heard some news that sparked an immediate feeling of horror. Apparently, a small group of strangers was moving through the outlying villages. They were visiting the very people with whom the gift of fire had been shared. Furthermore, the strangers were teaching that the true place for fire was on the ground and in one's home. And contrary to all reason, they were teaching that there was nothing to fear. They even changed the 4 sacred sayings and replaced them with sayings of their own that went like this: let everyone embrace the fire, tear down every stony pyre, let fire call and bring to birth flames to transform the earth. This was bad enough, but even worse were the stories that some people had acted on this dangerous teaching. They were building their fire on the ground, and some may even have taken it inside their home. This information was more than these people could bear. Their worst fears seemed to be coming true. Terrorised, they stopped giving away the fire they had, but they could not undo what had been done. From then on, the world was divided into 2 kinds of people. There were those who accepted the new sacred saying. They discovered that when they placed the fire on the ground and took it inside their homes, the earth was not set on fire at all. Instead, their homes were warmer. The great gift was easier to use, and it was a delight to share it without fear. Then there were those who held to the old ways. They kept their fire to themselves and spent their lives looking for the perfect stones to make perfect piles, to keep their little fires safely away from their little plots of earth. If Jesus had told this story, about now he would have looked at the crowd around him and asked the question, which of these do you think are human beings who will flourish? I've been using a tree motif for the PowerPoint, and it resonates for me with Psalm 1. Blessed is the one who is like a tree planted by streams of living water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Thank you.